Michael, welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so good to see you.
It's so good to be here with you guys.
Yes, Richard here. So fantastic. We couldn't resist having you on. Anyone who writes a book titled Therapeutic Improvisation, all our listeners will know, oh, wow, they've probably been sitting around for the last few weeks while the book's been out saying, when are Richard and Matt going to talk to Michael? You know, so yeah, it was exactly on the boil. But exactly that, your book, Therapeutic Improvisation, How to Stop Winging It and Own It as a Therapist. We want to drill into that little title, but we've said a few things about you. But Michael, could you tell us a few things, about yourself and just what brought this book about?
Yeah, it's so funny. When I think about the book, I actually think back to my college days when I was taking jazz improvisation lessons with the guy at Williams College named Andy Jaffe. And this guy was so amazing. He could listen to a recording and instantly tell you what chords were going, all the inner voicings. He could go reproduce it on the piano, and he knew all the theory backwards and forwards. And I just was like dumbfounded and mystified by it. And I couldn't hack being an improviser on the piano like him. But it turns out what he was teaching me was how to be a fantastic therapist. And I didn't know it yet. And so when I set out to write this book, I'm working at Manhattan School of Music at this conservatory with all these jazz and classical musicians. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there it is again. This connection between what we do in the therapy room and read the chord changes of our clients' emotions and thoughts and their stories is everything that we're trying to do as therapists. Often we feel like we're winging it, but we really want to be improvising like that great jazz player up there on the stage.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, just let us know a little bit more about the actual job you're doing there at the Manhattan School of Music.
Yeah, so it was so fascinating. I fell into this job. I was going into private practice, and I found this. I always worked in college counseling, and this part-time gig showed up at Manhattan School of Music, and I'm like, I can't leave college counseling behind. I'm going to part-time it and work in my private practice, and that's when I started writing in earnest. Right. And so the combination, the cross-pollination between these different things are what really led to, I gotta bring this together. So I work in their counseling center with instrumentalists, vocalists, musical theater folks, actors, jazz, classical, like every instrument in the orchestra. And one of the things that I've noticed is that musicians can really get what it is that we do in therapy so well, because they're used to following the changes of harmony changing, and also locating what are the main themes in a score, what are the main themes of the composition, and what happens. Don't get scared. It's the development section. It's going to sound a little agitated, but that's how it works. You're going to get to the recapitulation. So there's ways in which what I saw is what they're doing artistically is what we're doing, all of us, in our emotional lives.
Wow, that's amazing. So this training in music gives you an intuition as to what is going on social emotionally.
Yeah, and it's so funny because some people don't resonate with the music thing as well. But in a way, I think one of the open secrets in therapy is that this is so much more of an art form and an artistic process than we give it credit for. We are essentially helping people write their novels, their short stories, their poetry. We are both figuring out how to be an actor who can get in our character and their characters. Sometimes we're directors helping them kind of bring out more of their lines, but we're always trying to help with that creative new place that they're trying to go, that transformative moment.
This is fabulous. I mean, Ernie Rossi, my mentor, who was came out of Milton Erickson sort of area, but this is one of the things. Sadly, he passed away a couple of years ago. But talked about creative moments. That what we need to do is we need to learn how, as therapists, to get out of the way to allow the client's creative moments. But as you're talking about all this music, the things and the naturalness and where it comes from, I was thinking back to some tapes I saw of Bobby McFerrin, the Don't Worry, Be Happy guy, because he did a lot of that. And he would take this with audiences, and he was doing something that we'd done in acting school. I was an actor in my early days, and he would sing some notes, and he would go da 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 da, and then pause, and the audience would all go da da. They'd all do the cadence, together.
Yeah.
And of course there was someone out there who was a natural jazz musician who went up to the sustained fifth or something. But the essence of it was that there is this natural flow, musical flow. We learnt Shakespeare that way. The iambic pentameter is a rhythm. And once you get the rhythm, and there was so many things of Americans trying to get understand how to do Shakespeare, but this is something that is very important. We talk about pacing, we talk about leading and doing so forth. What do you feel about the nature? Who's leading? Who's following? What's going on in that musical experience, but of language between therapist and client?
It's so interesting. It's sort of like sometimes you watch these great conductors and they're conducting and they're leading authoritatively, and then you notice some moments that they're dropping and they're just enjoying a soloist or taking it in and almost like just like courting it. And I think in a lot of ways, we're like conductors at sometimes, like we conduct intakes, we conduct sessions. And then sometimes we're also like a good pianist who's like soloing, but then learning how to comp and back up and when to pull back or when to kind of use certain kinds of the range of the piano. And so I think we're doing it like in terms of pacing. I think when we think about doing a session, one of the first sessions, I think we're trying to figure out who am I playing with? What am I working with here? What's the range? What are the different kind of styles that this person feels more comfortable? Are they comfortable in sadness? Are they comfortable in anger? What tone colors are in their repertoire? And how can I say, oh, I'm hearing, like today I heard a guy and he was talking, he was so kind, he was so sweet. And I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was great, but I was like, I want to hear a little bit more anger. I want more trumpets. I want more percussion. But I also wanted to say, I love the woodwinds in you. You have such a beautiful woodwind section. And so I think it's always about trying to notice and improve the range of what we're working with. Imagining as if we all have an orchestra or jazz group inside of us. We are all built with a polyphonic mind and heart. Like we have all these different instruments. And I think one of the things that makes people confusing, but also maddeningly wonderful, is that we have this richness and texture. And musicians, like especially jazz musicians, they don't get upset about dissonance. They get interested. Ooh, let me embrace it and see where I could take this anew. That's an interesting thing.
Well, there was a wonderful thing that I've got some great musicians and jazz musicians and that were friends of mine over the years. Because when people used to say to me, how good are you? You're a good piano player. And I say, oh, I'm not too bad. And then someone said, no, you're really good. I said, not compared to my friends. That's right. But there were a few things they talked about. I remember Jay Stewart, who's a pretty big name in Australia. And he used to say in jazz, if you make a mistake, the thing is you do it again. And people think you meant it.
Yep.
But it's so applicable to what we've been talking about therapist errors, what we call enactments. This thing where you make an error. Now, in psychodynamic, you all go off and then have to have therapy because of transference and countertransference. You're all going mental. Whereas people like Peter Levine and Pat Ogden have said, now that was interesting. Where did that mistake come from? What led to that? What came out of that error? And I think this is a when you're talking about improvisation, you're not just talking about getting the perfect music, but sort of almost like making the perfect mistakes.
I love that. It's so funny. I had that happen this morning and it was so cool. So I was talking to this woman and she was talking about how her parents really aren't emotionally tuned in, right? And superficially they could be. Yeah. And then all of a sudden someone texted me and it was something rather like important. And I looked at it and I tried to write back and keep the thread and I missed a beat. And she was like, oh no, if you have to go. And instead of saying, uh-oh, I was like, oh my gosh, that was a perfect example of just what your parents do. And I saw in that moment how you tried to take care of me, how you felt hurt, how you felt sad. And instead of saying, oh my God, that was an egregious error, that was an opportunity.
Isn't it fantastic that
Yeah.
taking that and the creative, that creative moment, as Ernie would say, and we go, what can I create with that? Where can that go? But Matt, I mean, your musical background is a bit deeper.
Yeah.
I'm a player, but you're actually a theory. So you guys have got a lot of theory in your heads. What's the play that you've been doing, Matt?
Yeah, well, I love this this idea of the form and flow. So we're seeing, we're seeing patterns, repeating patterns within a larger form. So if we're thinking of a symphony or we're thinking of a person's life, it's very similar, isn't it? And we have an intuition about form. But no, the form doesn't necessarily, we have a form when it comes to a symphony, but every symphony sounds, really different. And so every person's life obviously is very different, but we have an intuition about form and about flow. And is that something that's sort of in your mind, maybe not consciously, but subconsciously as you're working with somebody?
I think it's a little bit of both, Matthew. It's interesting to me, even when you talk about music, it's so analytical. Musicians are so analytical. They're thinking about, sounds in space, in time, and metrically dividing it, but also thinking about relationships between harmonies and their patterns all the time. And yet, they're also emotionally responsive to them. And so one of the things I think about musicians is a great metaphor for therapists is that it's a perfect kind of marriage of the right brain, left brain, the best of both of those worlds. Because it does help for for me to have had that experience of saying, oh, I just made this creative mistake and feeling it. But then to say, ooh, I'm going to talk about the harmonies that I just saw. And that's knowing the theory. And that's using your theory or theories in a way that I call therapeutic authority, which I call the yang of, the yin and yang of a therapeutic voice. Therapeutic authority is saying, okay, I'm going to zero in on something and be discriminating about it and use that analytical prowess to give it form. I'm going to use my therapeutic yin to give it feeling and connection.
Right.
So that's the value of a therapist, doing a reflection on the session, sort of taking a bit of time. What Scott Miller talks about, deliberate practice. That so like a musician would do that, an actor does that, and this is a really positive case for that. Is this something that you find yourself automatically doing? At the end of a session, just reviewing the notes of the thing, like you did as music.
It's so funny. I think, the thing is, I think also we all start with a leaning. Most of us either really good, therapeutic presence, we're really receptive and open and interested and empathic. And then some of us prefer, I'm ready to go for the technique or drill into what's going on. And sometimes clients complain, I had this great therapist. They were really good. They listened beautifully. And they just were really tuned in, but I didn't know what the hell to do. And then I had this really great therapist. They were really great. They zeroed in on exactly what I need to do, but they didn't really listen. And it's really about the combination, which is also what makes a good artist, which makes a good musician, is someone who's listening keenly, but also responsive. There's a great picture of John Coltrane while he's playing with Miles Davis on the Kind of Blue album. And Miles is playing in the background, and Coltrane looks like he's deep in meditation or prayer because he's listening so deeply. It's that kind of toggling back and forth between deep listening and actually expressing. And this is where I think sometimes, how you feel burnt out as a therapist, because we can sometimes be like these paid listeners. If we do this back and forth, we're listeners and players. And it goes back and forth. And that's where the music happens between us. And so I think of therapy sessions more like collaborations and mashups. Where you're kind of trying to see what kind of interesting music can we make and kind of harmonize and do interesting variations on this melody together To me, that's a much more energizing approach. And it really protects us from burnout, but it also means that we're always feeling like creative and alive.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that makes music interesting is the dynamic between dissonance and harmony, between tension and resolution. And, you know, it makes for an interesting interaction. It makes for an interesting life. Sometimes I think we might come into psychotherapy, you know, feeling the need to always have resolution and have harmony. And so we leave out the tension and the dissonance. And so what's your take on that when there's the I don't know, I don't know, it sort of takes out the color, I guess, and the
it does. You know, it's interesting. There's been an interesting resurgence and renaissance in looking at negative emotions, right? You see Susan Cain coming out with a book like Bittersweet, talking about the combination of bitterness and sweetness. Daniel Pink is talking about the power of regret. Emotional agility, Susan David, right? Like Brene Brown, all these folks. And I think they're tapping into something that positivity is great, but dissonance and positivity is really interesting.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's interesting, like, because those of us who don't relate to music as well, I like to also think about it like the poets basically said that we are not one, we are many. Like we've many selves. And I like to think of these different selves at the table and they're having a conversation, but each has sort of different takes and they sometimes can be antagonistic, but that's what makes the conversation interesting. And it is, I think it's like almost like really healthy to like spur on the dissenting voices and also spur on like the kind of like out there opinion or the feeling that can't fully be expressed and bring it all together and have a real dialogue. I think that's the same thing as music with good dissonance. Because we can't keep dissonance for too long. We want to get in the dissonance, but then we want to see how together, like harmony is, having dissonances lead towards consonance.
Well, that was Ernie, again, mentioning Ernie again, but one of his my favorite titles of his is The Symptom Path to Enlightenment, which is really the dissonant, the difficult. The difficulty is not we don't want to solve the difficulty. What we want to do is use the difficulty to as an indicator, as a prompt, as a guide, as some kind of driver. Rather than where we focus our attention.
You know what I think is actually interesting about both this too, is that I think we have this inner myth and illusion that we should be more static creatures, right? Nice. We like to feel like, oh, I can locate, like, it's almost like, you know, when you go to a store and you have the map that says you are here. I think we always
How do they know?
How do they know? And I think there's a part of us in some not so secret place that wants to always have it very defined like that. And the funny thing is we're built to be much more dynamic and interesting. But sometimes instead of trusting how to follow that process and listen for where it moves, we try and keep ourselves here. I shouldn't be feeling sad. I should be feeling relief. I shouldn't be feeling angry. I should be feeling grateful. Well,
and as the therapist, you're saying that I need to get them to this happiness or get to them. To that, and the note I took as you were we were talking before about the therapist talking, sometimes they're listening, sometimes they're not. Just this essence where we're taught kind of, we're looking for the point at where we take over.
Yeah.
And I think that's the error.
Yeah, I think that's the error too.
Yeah. Yeah, and you bring this out. What are some of the cases you've got in the book? There are a number of things where you show how this. Maybe we need to give it a little bit of, a little bit of, sort of real life form. Could you give us a sort of one that is one off the top of your head?
Yeah, so I once had this really interesting student, and she had come in and she was thrown my way because she had been literally cutting, and her roommates were really disturbed and her resident advisor was really disturbed. And she came into me and she basically like was very sort of defensive and like, you know, I had a therapist before and she told me this was a problem too, and you're probably going to tell me the same and you're not going to help me, right? So it was like really kind of brusque and really kind of pushy, and inside I was like, huh. But I realized there was a sense of just trying to listen and say, what am I missing here? and stay with the dissonance. And I wanted to say, I am feeling off put by what you're saying and pushed away, but I want to understand what you like about cutting.
Right. Yeah.
And so, by the way, that's the essence of improvisation and acting and comedy is yes and, right? Instead of no, I'm going to help you. I don't even know you. What are you talking about? Right? I was like, yes, I am possibly going to be someone who's going to disappoint you and hurt you. And I want to hear the fuller story. So tell me more.
Yeah.
And how has cutting been your friend?
Yeah, that I was just reviewing a discussion we had with a professor about hoarding. And she said, one of the first things you do is you ask the hoarder, what is the problem? Because she said, a lot of the time, it's not what you think. It's not the hoarding. There's some other thing there's some other dynamic that's going on that's in the forefront of their mind, and hoarding is an outcome. But you can't assume that you just go in and say, right, we're going to fix this hoarding problem. No. It's much more dynamic than that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly
it's much more interesting too. I think the other thing that this saves us from, especially in a world where we're very polarizing and easy to one-dimensionalize each other, that staying open, and remember how you said dissonance and staying with dissonance is so important? That's important for creative life.
Yes.
In order to be creative, you have to tolerate some temporary dissonance because you know something is going to emerge or unfold. And some of it is a leap of faith, and some of it is the prepared mind.
Yeah. And I think one of the big errors, I think, in our understanding of human behavior that we learn sort of in graduate school with therapy, but I learned quite differently in acting school, was the difference between dissonance and conflict. That there are things that aren't sitting well, and that are sort of disrupting, but then there's actual this fighting of conflict, and certainly the conflicts, you want to remove the conflicts, what I call the impossibilities, from their nature and experiences, the headbutting that they're doing with their past, and then you can get down to this okay, this can go when we've just got the wrong pattern. And the beauty is we have memory reconsolidation. We have this capacity in our brain to take what we thought was the only way to do things, and actually just through insight and just sudden moment, and this is why the creative moment's going on, the brain can change the way it wires everything, and we can have that insight. And these sorts of things, do you find in your work that this sort of aha moment is more prevalent, or it occurs more often, or it's more likely to occur? What are your feelings with that?
I do. I think it's so much more catalytic. And I mean that in the truest sense of the word, that it happens faster and it happens more organically. And I think part of it also, what you said too, is that the insight emerges, but the insight also emerges with a certain kind of presence. This is the reason why I think Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was so amazing, really, as a therapist for children, because he was saying, I'm going to help you with the difficult modulations of life and stay with you as a support and a witness through it. And the other thing that you said, Richard, that I think is really important, that's another misconception, is that we shouldn't have dissonance and conflict. We are built with dissonance and conflict. We are built with two essential brains, like one that's very emotional leaning and one that's logic leaning. We're a square peg in a round hole. We're built, our system, our default system is about complementarity that comes out of antagonism.
And that keeps us going. That creates energetic activity.
That's it. And that's where I think Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, that picture, of the man inside the square and the circle, is the ideal form, because when we can integrate those, that is divine. And that is what creativity is. But it means, and so I was listening to a musician the other day play this beautiful Bach prelude. It's gorgeous, and it's like this intricate thing. It's fast and it's difficult to do. And it's like watching a Swiss clock inside every little intricate gear. but it's difficult. And I said, God, this piece is so hard because it's like a train that just keeps on going. But I said, even though it's a train is a machine, and you got to make it feel like there's waves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being human we're an intricate machine, but we also are waves. We're circular. And if you can fit those squares and those circles together and create an artful moment of sharing and witnessing. And by the way, the other thing is the power of we become more fully ourselves through the power of being witnessed and engaged by another. That's why art is so powerful, because art requires an audience, even an imaginary audience.
Yeah.
That's how art sings.
That is so cool what you mentioned about Bach, because Bach is, there's a lot of dissonance, and there's a lot of modulations that happen, and it only works if it's flowing and moving, and often quite quickly. And when you perceive the whole, it's beautiful. If you stop at any one point and just play that chord there, that dissonant chord, and then the next one, which is weirdly modulating, that you would never think could happen in that style of music, then it's horrible. And I think people get stuck in a moment, and they think this is their life, this snapshot right now. But no, this horrible dissonance right now, you need to consider it in the flow of time, and be like a Bach fugue.
Or Brahms, right? And the other thing too, I think it's also the reason I think why Shakespeare stands the test of time, because within Shakespeare's characters are so many dimensions that you don't just think about Hamlet in one way. You think, poor soul, he's lost his father. Oh my God, what is this mad guy doing, right? And you also think, gosh, how is he taking out on Ophelia, this anger at his mother? Like all of these different dimensions where the villain sometimes has heroic elements and the hero has villainous elements.
Yes.
And to see the fact that we can be contradictory, I think allows us to play with more of the grayness and dimensionality of ourselves. And that allows us to be more open to the creativity and possibility in others. The other thing that I think is really cool is that I think we learn this and we start this first as children, and then we grow out of it. Sometimes I think parents are better, advised to learn and be reminded from their children what's extraordinary about how we work. Because the imaginative curiosity capacity of children, the improvisatory quality of children is beyond compare. But what they don't have is the discriminating power, the expert's mind, to string it together in the most sophisticated ways that we do. But I think the best artists draw on both child's mind and expert's mind.
And of course the child is using the parent as a thing, and that's in therapy. I mean, I've always sort of argued the thing that a therapist like us in the village, we'd just be, sort of Uncle Michael or Uncle Richard or Uncle Matthew, and people would turn up with a pot roast or something and end up chatting. It's a more organic experience, but it's using these art, using drama. I mean, certainly acting was there. We're just talking about Shakespeare, talking about Hamlet, and that idea that there are underlying themes. Certainly, there are things that move off to the side. And I know when I was doing Hamlet, one of my main drivers, you find you go for 3 or 4 main elements. And I do this in therapy. I mean, because one with Hamlet is I just don't know how to get a handle on this. I can't get it to be or not to be. Shakespeare actually says, just in case you don't get it, he doesn't get it. And the client is giving us the to be or not to be speech in their language, in their behaviors, in their emotions, and just begging us to get the play. Please get it. Because,
I love that. That is such a brilliant image of it. Matthew, did you want to say something? That's such a beautiful, I think that is the essence of therapy, of being in front of a client who's telling us their to be or not to be moment, and asking us to entertain with them the terror, the despair, the hope, the longing, all of it.
Yeah.
And to, as Rilke says, to embrace the questions along with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have a propensity to want to, because we want clarity. I think we might want a very simplistic, image of ourselves. And as we've been saying, characters are not simple like that. The hero always has an element of evil. The evil one always has an element of some redeemable quality.
Yeah.
We're complex, and so when we are dealing with a client who doesn't want that complexity, they just want simplicity, that's not realistic.
Well, and even that client I told you who was cutting, right? The conventional method was to say, this cutting is bad and you should stop, and people are concerned about you. But what I found out is that this cutting was her savior, because she couldn't regulate her emotions and she didn't have support. And the people who were supposed to be helping her were disappointing her. And the people who were caring about her were now making her feel ashamed of trying to take care of herself.
Yeah.
Yep. And so instead of in understanding the tonality and the harmony underlying her feeling about cutting changes the whole thing.
So you're setting up then for the resolution. You're setting up for the modulation into something more harmonious. Yeah.
Yeah. And ironically, often we have to go through the dissonance first. And often we have to suspend judgment or disbelief, just like when we're reading a good fiction.
Well, sometimes we have to get to a certain chord to pivot into the resolution. Yeah.
Completely.
Now, can I hazard it a guess, Michael, of this the subtitle, how to stop winging it and own it as a therapist, just in the context of what we're saying, to stop winging it, meaning I'm saying, so I don't have to be in charge of this. I don't have to be trying to figure out how to solve the problem. I don't have to be the healer, and I can just own my part of the experience. I own the instrument I'm playing, and own being in this musical, in this, this experience with the client. There's this what we talk about co-creative, but cooperative and co-engaged. So winging it is kind of where I'm trying to do it on my own.
It's interesting because I didn't really know where I was going. The one thing I was thinking is that so many of us, when we're starting out, or even when we're trying to develop our own voice, because I feel like as therapists, we're developing our own voice like a good writer or a painter, and we have to feel comfortable in our own skin and our own bones, because that's the instrument we're using. So all of us need to feel like we own it. But we often feel like we're just winging it. And we don't know why it's working or when it's working and how it's working. And I think you're right. Part of it is not just us owning it, but us also letting go that we're owning this together by engaging in this improvisation together. But where I've gotten the tools, just like a good musician can help bring out a lower level playing individual and help them up their game. And, you kind of can hear that when someone's kind of like echoing a lick and saying, ooh, that's good. And helping them to expand it. And so I think there is something about sharing the stage together. And I think there's something really exciting about that, because, I think it's exciting for the clients too, because our owning and sharing of our voice helps to cultivate and call forth their voice. And there's no way for them not to respond from their deepest, fullest selves.
Well, this is certainly, we actually have a chapter in our book at the end. This is the work that Matt and I have been doing, and we're trying to expose a lot more now, is responsiveness as an extension now, as a step forward from client-centeredness, which Rogers was brilliant, but it's not just about exploring or entertaining or engaging, but this wonderful thing of this interplay between therapist and client, which you've just
it's the creative juice, right? It's the creative, and it moves it from not only one person to two person, but also something between this third. I mean, it's interesting that music is based on thirds, right? Like that's what makes it go. And I think responsiveness respects the fact that our psyche is dynamic. The interplay between psyches is dynamic.
Yeah.
And you can't, it's like talking about light. How can you talk about light as something that's not dynamic, right?
Yeah.
You could talk about it as a particle, but it's also a wave. It's going to be both. And I think when we're talking about therapy, we're talking about something that we can look at static and we can look at dynamic. In fact, I think Goethe said something to the effect of music is liquid architecture.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So why do we learn diagnostic criteria? Not because we want to pathologize, because we want to understand certain architectural structures that can help us understand this music that's moving. And
this huge, what I think is the great error of this black and white sort of thinking that we have in the world of people saying, psychotherapy's an art, not a science. And of course, the whole point of our book is to say, no, it's both working together. As you say, left and right hemispheres interplaying and interacting, coming in at the appropriate time.
Listen, I mean, the best artists are scientists and the best scientists are artists. I mean, there's no way. And that's what I'm saying. What I've learned from musicians, if anything, is there's no space between the science and the art at all.
No space between the science and the art. Beautiful.
Yeah. I think if therapists approach their craft, as a scientist / artist, it's got to be more engaging and exciting, and you're going to be, you're not going to burn out as quickly, and
No, and it's so funny. I had a client just this morning, first time meeting him in 45 minutes. I think he was amazed at how many connections I can help him make, and he could make. Yeah, because we can drill in the science, but the art helps us to really feel our way through together. Yeah. And there's something like, and that's what reminds me, I got to give homage to my piano teacher, Andy Jaffe. When I watched him do that, I was like, how do you do that so fast? It was the science, but the art is the fact that he practiced playing licks so that he can pull them off with musicality.
Yeah.
And all these things are necessary, all this knowledge. I'm just thinking of Paul Simon describing, and I can't remember the particular, the song he was going, but he was on a talk show and he was going, and I'm playing this thing, and here's a bit from Bach. So here's a bit from CBT, and here's a bit from actually some blues guys. I put them on, I listen. So here's a bit of, Gestalt. And he said, and I've got to hear, and this, I think, is something that's really a beautiful thing that musicians can tell us in this particular example, is he's playing away and he says, I got to hear, and I said, and I'm not sure where to go now. And I think that's what therapists sometimes need to acknowledge and embrace and go, okay, I've used this technique, I've used that technique, I've used this thing, and they all are working well and the client's liking this, but I actually don't know where to go now. Got some options. So there is that need to then improvise and interact with the client, try something which the client might say, oh, no, I really don't like that. And I think that's a fine thing. You go, oh, great. Well, let's not do that. Let's go somewhere else. But by the time you've got there, if you've only got one module, you've only got one therapeutic technique in your bag, well, it's going to be the same song over and over again.
I think watching Get Back over the pandemic was really interesting to watch, the Beatles and how they really had music, pop music, but all forms of music into a science of how they could marshal all these different styles and licks and then kind of use their kind of spontaneous emotional sides to bring it together. And, I was reading Quincy Jones came out with a new book called 12 Notes. It's really great, these inspirational little tidbits. And he says, basically, music is about science and soul. And the soul is the feeling part. And I think, when you look at masters like the Beatles or Mozart or, Quincy Jones or anybody like that, there's no separation at all between them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way, that's as it should be.
Yeah. It reminds me of I was with a client and sort of not really getting very far, and she seemed awfully awkward. And I had kind of, like you said, Richard, I'd sort of been through everything I knew what to do in the session. And so it was improv time. And I said to her, why don't we just go for a walk? And she lit up and she said, oh yes, let's just get out of here and let's just go for a walk. And then,
Wow.
and so as we went for a walk, it just changed everything. She opened up. It was, we just had a wonderful session, just walking the block, around out of the office. And if I had have, been sort of, just sticking to, I don't know, staying, the script. Yeah. I mean, because, you're not supposed to just take the client for a walk, but that was the point of, that was the improv that really bore a lot of fruit for that client. So.
Yes. So, well, masses of stuff. I mean, we could wander on forever, of course. So, but we best not, because I know people's attention starts to wane around about now. But I really think we've prosecuted the case pretty thoroughly of just stop prosecuting cases. But what do you think, Michael? Is something particular that we've not asked or not said, or is it just this little sum up that you can give us as we move towards the end?
I think that there's something that we have an important role as therapists to not only teach people the science of how we work from the inside out, but also to help people see that whether you're an artist or not, it's all about finding a way to live life creatively. That's where things really hum. That's where things really coalesce. That's where things really feel fulfilling and energizing. And that's, I think, the magic that we're all looking to kind of hold and carry and keep on transforming, right?
Yeah.
And keep on creating and discovering new forms. If we can help people see that mental health is about that, as well as discovering and finding relief for problems, I think we'll be doing a great service.
Yeah, wonderful.
Okay.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us here and having a bit of improv together.
It's been really fun, my friends. This has been great.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm going to go and play something for a little while, but yeah. So we just really appreciate your work, but we are really grateful that you've taken the time, and Nortons have taken the time to write this down. So that we can share it, at least in this book form. And now we've got this discussion here. I see you've done some other discussions and podcasts and things around the world. So people, please look him up, Michael Alcée. Look him up, and you get some great. And obviously, each discussion will be different.
I riffed with you guys. I riffed with you guys in completely new territory. It was fantastic.
That's cool. That's cool.
Well, us with you too.
All right.
So for now, we'll just have to say our goodbyes and thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. We'll catch you next time then.
Thanks, guys.